Eric. I reached out to Eric Elness again, and just to remind him that we are looking forward to having him here next week. We'll be set up a little differently. I'll be over on that side so that we can hook my computer up to the monitor and you can see him joining us by Zoom. And I think that should work out splendidly, to be honest with you. Couple of things before we get started. This weekend, both Saturday and Sunday, following worship, our mission commission will be having a little town hall meeting. On Saturday, it'll be in here, and on Sunday, it'll be in the fellowship hall. I think we're going to have about a 30-minute presentation just to update everybody on some of the things we have going on, the organizations that we support and work with. Just so you know, we have scheduled another trip down to the border for October 21st through the 25th, Monday through Friday. And we've scheduled a trip to Nicaragua next February to visit Amos, who's in the top picture over there, which is a medical mission in Nicaragua that we've been supporting for quite some time. Because of COVID and then because of the political situation in Nicaragua, we have not been down there in several years. And so this will be our first trip down in a while, and that'll be in February. So we're going to start putting out the save the dates for that and for the border trip. Probably in a couple of weeks, we'll get some signups for anybody who would like to go to the border. You may have heard John Fossum and me talk about our trip there back in June or May. And it's a 3-day event. So anybody that would like to go will have more information there. So that's just FYI. As we get started, welcome again to everybody who's here. We are on chapter 11 and the 11th affirmation. And so I'm wondering, as we get started, if you have any questions or comments regarding either the chapter, the affirmation, or the sermon and so forth. I do want to say, Laureen, I've heard nothing but wonderful affirmative comments about your prayer from Sunday. So thank you for participating in worship. Any questions, things of interest that you want to make sure we talk about while we're here today? Jerome, are you warm?
I don't have a shirt on, so that means I'm warm.
Jerome is naked, y'all. That's why we meet here. I feel like it's hot.
It is really.
All right. So if you could
Open the door.
Too much going on. I don't know if the door helps.
In the window.
We could possibly try to get some flow through the windows. We'd have to open those and those. Anybody that feels inspired, it's your time. Okay. Back to questions.
I open them on Thursday, so I'll let someone know.
All right. Any questions, comments, topics you want to make sure we cover while we're here? Yes, Pat.
Always bring this up. But the statement of Admiral Byrd when he was dying,
Yeah.
below, and then it goes on to say what would happen in your life to say that you go out with the place. I found that something different to think about.
Yeah, I marked that in my book. It's like, wow, that was pretty profound, wasn't it? Now, obviously, the Admiral Byrd situation, being 1,000 miles from anybody and 50 below and all that is extreme. But what a great question. What would you need to do to ensure that you could end your life with integrity and some sense of closure or purpose? Wow, that was really cool. Carlene?
For a few years, I was commuting to Utah for work, and they made it so easy to keep the Sabbath because this was a long time ago. Everything closed down on Sunday, and there were no options to run to the department stores and the malls and all these things. And
Yeah.
you could feel the difference.
I've often wondered about I mean, obviously, a Jewish person would tell you, interesting, you're
Yeah.
taking the Sabbath on the first day of the week. Yeah. You wonder, sometimes Sabbath, conversations about Sabbath become conversations about blue laws and, something like that. And I think that's helpful. I also think it's a little sometimes distracting. But yeah, it's interesting to imagine that. Years ago, I remember telling the story about when I was a child, the pastor preached a passionate sermon on Sabbath and how not supposed to be working on Sunday. I think it was kind of the first wave of non-church organizations planning things on Sundays, and churches were kicking back against that, leaving stores open and all that. And it was a real strong, passionate sermon about the need for blue laws and to rest on Sunday. And after church, we went out to eat. And there's a big giant open air market. And on the second floor, it was an all you can eat buffet place, which very inexpensive, but nice. And it was a big treat for our family to go there. There were 30 church members up there. I remember looking around thinking, we're all taking the Sabbath, right? And then I noticed all the folks in the white jacket who were not taking Sabbath. They were taking our orders and they were refilling our cups. And I thought, wow, in order for us to enjoy this privilege of what we're calling Sabbath, they have to work. And that was an interesting thing because I was little, but after that, I noticed that the next Sunday, as soon as we got home from church, my mom put on an apron and started cutting up the chicken that she always fried on Sunday. And she would always tell us how much work that was to cut the chicken, bread the chicken, fry the chicken, and all that stuff. So while we were watching football games, she was working. And it's always been interesting that when one sets a day aside, a specific time, that's supposed to be Sabbath for everybody, it often becomes, you have to bend a lot of rules. One of my best friends from seminary became Jewish after seminary. She had been a Presbyterian minister for a few years, and she converted to Judaism. She was a single woman who adopted a child, and she told me one time, you wouldn't believe all the caveats we get to have. She said, like on the Sabbath, you're not supposed to turn on the light switch. So you send your child to do it because she hasn't been bat mitzvahed yet. And she's not obligated to observe the Sabbath. And she does just all these little, I think, we can make fun of that. We can laugh at that. I think it's humorous. But I also think sometimes that's the best we can do is we know there's something there to Sabbath rest. And we know that there's something life-giving about pulling away from the routine and the work and so forth. We know that we still have to eat and somebody's got to pull the ox out of the ditch, and, those kinds of things. So we know that there will always be exceptions. And there's just something about ensuring that the exceptions are exceptions that help us to appreciate the rule. So I never quite know how to feel about Sabbath day in a collective sense. It never seems equally meted out. But I think the notion is really powerful. Just to let you know, you don't have to work every single hour of every single day to be worth something. That alone is powerful. Yes.
Lorraine and I were talking about this on the way up, and he talks about in Luke, the guy he's going to build bigger and bigger barns, and the thing that I had never really seen in this parable, it was actually quite obvious, is it's the idea of then. And it's like, after I tore down these barns and build bigger warehouses and more stuff, it's like I said to Lorraine, we've got too much crap in this house and we're trying to downsize. And Maureen says, well, you need to be more organized. I said, no, you need to get a bigger house. That's,
Buy a storage shed.
yeah. Yeah, I know a guy who's got 2 of them, getting more. But it's this idea of them, and it's like, no, you could die right now. People do it all the time, and, it's always like, we're looking at, we might move out here. It's like, well, then we're gonna be, it's like, no, there is no then. It's like everything is now, and it's sort of a process you'll go through and you'll look back on it. It's not like you're going to work like a donkey now, and then there's going to be this sort of paradise where you sit around playing golf, which he makes fun of here.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the point of the song Cats in the Cradle, right? We'll get together then, son. We'll have a good time then. And then never happened, right? It then needs to become now, or it's not a thing.
But it's like you're avoiding the Sabbath is linked to that. You're saying, well, I can't rest because there won't be, then I won't have, barns full of
Right.
Joseph Bank suits or whatever it is.
That's right, right. Yes, Lauren.
I'm thinking of the image that you just shared with us of your mom cutting up the chicken. And I'm reading a beach book by a Ruth Riel, and it's called Delicious. And her love for food is amazing, and her understanding. And one of the things I was thinking of your mom, yeah, she was cutting up the chicken and she was doing work. But she was doing it because my guess is at that table there was joy from that chicken.
Right, right.
That idea of community on
Right.
the Sabbath.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because on Sunday, I wanted to emphasize the word rest, which I think is missing from this affirmation. It's not missing from the chapter. It's not even missing from the explanation on page 125. The word comes up often, but it's not in the affirmation. So Saturday after worship, we have our life together time in here, and I was sitting with a couple he said, you do a lot. And he was going on about the things I do. And he said, do you ever take a day off? And I hate when people take the topic of a sermon and ask me about it. And I said, yeah, Fridays. Fridays are my day off. And I always put on my email, there's an automated response if someone reaches out saying Fridays are my Sabbath, and I will be slow to respond if you need something immediately. And I have Sue Ann's email address. And they said, well, what do you do on your Sabbath? And it's mostly yard work. I am an incredibly happy person with either a baby in my hands or dirt under my fingernails, right? I just love weeding, and this week I was trimming the bougainvillea and stuff like that. That's my happy spot. And one of them said, oh, that's working. And for some people it is, that's their job. For some people, cutting up a chicken and frying it is drudgery and work. I don't know how delighted my mother was at the work part. I do think she delighted in the table. And I work hard on Fridays. I work hard at not working. I work hard at doing the stuff I enjoy. I'm pretty good about taking a nap on my hammock. Yeah. So rest, yes, but that doesn't just mean sitting on the recliner, right? There are other ways of embracing rest from my experience. I might be going about this all wrong. Now, a number of you are retired. And a good friend who retired not long ago that I'm afraid is developing a drinking problem. Her spouse has been retired for a while. I know her spouse has a drinking problem. And now they're hanging out of the house together all day long without any obligation. And I think that just, 5 o'clock became 4 o'clock, became 3 o'clock, became mimosas for brunch. What do you do when you have energy and verb, but not work that you're obligated to do? Are you able, what does Sabbath mean there? Yes.
I know what you're saying. When I retired, I had worked for 33 years at the university. And my husband was retired, semi. And I was going crazy being home. I would get up at 4, go to ride, I drove from Carlsbad to Costa Mesa. And I had a really difficult time. I didn't start drinking, could have. But I told my husband I need to get a part-time job or do something for myself. I want a brainless job. I don't have to think, because I had a lot of responsibility in my job. And I went to work at Walmart. They hired me as a security person at the front door.
All right.
And I loved it. I became friends because I said I could only work from 7 to 2 in the afternoon because my husband was getting ill. And they said, fine. So I did that, and I made friends with, because there was a lot of retired older people that came in at 7 o'clock in the morning. They started bringing me gifts. They started, because it was a brainless job, and I was just really friendly to everyone.
Yeah.
And to this day, they still ask me if I want to come back.
Sure.
Sure. No. But I totally understand how difficult it is.
So I have a friend, he was a pastor, he retired, and he always had wanted to work in a hardware store. You know, just something about being around tools and nuts and bolts, stuff like that. And so he went to Menards, which is kind of the Home Depot of the Midwest. And went to Menards. Wouldn't that be right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And they stuck him right where his heart's desirable. He's right in the hardware section. And he's working like 6 hours a day, maybe 4 days a week or whatever, how much they needed him, happy as a clam. And his manager came to him and said, listen, we need some folks outside in the lumber section. So we're going to start putting you out there instead of here. And Rich looked at him. This is the joy of retirement. He looked at him and said, listen, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, I'm going to be standing right here. And I'm either going to be here as an employee working like I am today, or as a customer who used to work here and is looking through what your selections are. But I'm not going out there. And the guy said, okay, we'll see you here tomorrow morning. And I thought, wow, I know that that's a privileged place to be. But boy, if we could approach work like, look, this is what makes my heart sing. So this is what I'm doing. If I get paid for it, lovely. If I don't, yeah.
That retirement thing is so hard, because we heard a sermon maybe 10 years ago about, at Mariners Church, about how they needed us, and you don't want to go into retirement resting. You want to die with your boots on, don't you? That was the whole thing, die with your boots on. And so we kind of dug into that, and that's when our youngest left the house for college, we jumped into, safe families with foster kids. And man, that was, 7 years, it was 3 families, basically one most, because one moved away, but it's left us kind of bitter because we had to finally break ties after 7 years. And we miss the kids terribly, but the mother, they're in Riverside, we haven't seen them for a year. So it's sort of like, God, what was that about? I mean, hopefully we made an impression on that. We had them for days, and it was exhausting.
Yeah.
And so, we thought that we were called to do that as semi-retired, but now we're kind of like, oh, and now we don't do that anymore. And I feel like now I get to maybe rest, but.
Yeah, so it looks like, so we have 2 options. One is you don't want to die. I mean, you want to die with your boots on, right? You want to die with your boots on. That's a great way to put it, whether you like it or not, great way to put it. The other is, but what do you need to do to end your life with integrity and meaning? The question that came out of the chapter. It's a little different, isn't it? I think when we put it that way, the question becomes, or how many wrong things must you say no to in order to say yes to the right thing? And we need permission to do that too, right? I wonder if just the notion of dying with our boots on compels us to take everything that comes along. I don't know. I mean, I say that as someone who would love to see us up our game volunteer-wise on occasion. But yeah, rest.
That's an interesting, how much do you have to do? And I can give just because I was in the government, they always try and plan your life for you, of course. And when I got ready to retire, one of the things they recommended was that you have some sort of plan in retirement, that you just don't not show up to the office one day, but you have something already lined up,
Right.
whether it's working in the hardware store or playing golf every day or whatever it happens to be. But I had been working with Habitat for Humanity on weekends for probably 10 years before I retired. And in that, I became more and more knowledgeable about construction.
Hmm.
And I went from being somebody who had to be told which end of the hammer to use to somebody who would provide that information to the new volunteers.
Right.
And as you worked along, and as my knowledge increased, this became more and more a job, and it became less enjoyable.
Hmm.
And tried to specialize and remember. And Judy and I had talks about it because I'd have a bad day because I couldn't get the volunteers to do what they needed to do, or something went wrong in the construction, whatever it happened to be. And you just had to shake your head and go, this is for the kids. This is not for the parents. When the parents would take the advantage of the circumstances, go out and buy a car nicer than mine. And eventually, over the last several years, we have been pulling back from our volunteer work because it all comes down to being too much of a job.
Yeah.
I don't want to volunteer, and we have trouble backing away. So
Yeah.
this is the first year we've actually told some people we're not going to be involved in certain aspects.
Okay.
So your rest.
Yeah. So hey,
You get worked out of it.
yeah.
And sometimes it's very subtle.
Yeah. Yeah. I admire that. I admire that a lot. Shirley?
It takes me back when I think about that, because when I grew up, I think one of the main things I heard from my father was the word integrity. And in my life since, so often I read integrity is doing the right thing when no one is looking. And I think you can measure yourself so much that way, because it's so easy often to not stay with that. I remember when my oldest son was in high school, I mean, I pretty much raised my children myself, and lying and stealing to me were just things that I lowered the boom about. So my son comes home from going to the drive-in movie, and I asked him, and he says, oh yeah, he says, there were a lot of us, and so 2 of us got in the trunk, and we only had to pay for 4. And I just lowered the boom on him. I remember, and I think he probably thought, oh my God, my mother's lost it. I said, you stole from that theater, you know, and to him, we didn't steal anything. He said, yes, you did. You went in without paying. But I mean, that short little sentence, integrity is doing the right thing when no one's watching, really says an awful lot.
That's really helpful. Yeah. We have a couple comments online too. Cindy makes a really important point. Val has a comment that's going to move us in a different direction, and we'll take that next. Cindy sees Sabbath as not just rest, but also rejuvenation, right? I think the phrase I typically use with regard to Sabbath is rest and restoration. There's more to it than just taking 5, right? Getting a breather. It's getting a breather so that we can breathe again and and live into what we're doing. So that's a great point. And specifically, if we think about what nurtures the mind, the body, and the spirit, that's what I really appreciated about the affirmation. It didn't just say unplug for a short amount of time, then plug back in. It talked about prayer, meditation, reflection, recreation as well. So I think he's fine with you golfing, Vlad. Despite his sideways comments on that. Val says something else, and she's appreciating the conversation about Sabbath, but as she read the chapter, she heard that taking care of our body is part of the affirmation. Just think about what it means to take care of our body, whether we're retired or not, whether we're talking about the Sabbath moments in our life or not. The whole idea that our bodies are temples and take care of it. I think growing up, the only application I ever heard of that was don't smoke. That's when we pull out the body being the time. You could be overweight, you could eat greasy food, you could never exercise a day in your life, but if you didn't smoke, you're taking care of your body. That explained a whole lot of things. But yeah, so what, how do you feel about what? I'm going to ask two questions. How do you treat your body? But having asked that now, how do you identify with your body? How do you treat your body? Let's deal with that first. Are you a good steward of that temple? Do you see your body as the temple of the Holy Spirit? And if so, what does that mean?
I see my body as probably not as a temple. I don't think I ever looked at it as a temple. But I think of it as an engine that keeps me going in my life so that I can continue to do all of the things that I like to do and want to do.
So in that sense, exercise, eating well, all of those things that help the body are kind of a means to an end of having a full and joyful life. Right? Yeah. Good. Great.
I'll toss in the aspect that as I age, it's a recognition that my body needs more time to recover. But if you do engage in sports or physical activity, that the time frame of recovery becomes just a little longer.
Well, that's
And so there's sort of a built-in Sabbath of your body needs rest.
yeah,
And when it gets the rest, then it can become strong.
right. Yes, Larry.
I think there's with aging in the body, there's this thing about doing what's right for you. I started to notice it because skiing and golf is big sports, and probably figured out by now. And I'm sort of like, well, this isn't the super hard flex expert one. This is like the next couple down, and it's perfect, right? Because I'm not that guy. I'm some 70-year-old guy, right? And I was golfing, and I said, gee, these feel better. And the guy said, you should spend $3,000 on these clubs. And I said, I'm not doing that. What are these shafts? He says, oh, they're this. I said, great, I'll go buy those for $50 a piece. They're great. I'm getting 30 extra yards. Why is it? It's a senior flex shaft. It's designed for you. It's not designed for some 15-year-old kid who's bench press 300 pounds. And when you realize that, you say, okay, I am going to pick the thing that is exactly right for me right now. And I'm not going to sort of put myself in the wheelchair before I need to, but at the same time, you can really accomplish a lot more.
Yeah.
It's like you're getting more out of the engine of your existence.
Right. But let's stay on the body for a moment. I am married to someone who has read every book there is under the sun on caring for the body, on nutrition, on chemicalizing and all that stuff. She recently read a book that just brought up the greatest tension. It's something that's been there all along, but this book really articulated it well. When it comes to the body, we kind of have two different thoughts that our culture puts on us. One is the identification of weight with health. So if someone's overweight, they're often accused of being lazy or unhealthy or something like that. What is intended there, badly stated quite often, is that obesity can lead to a number of health issues. So that's there. There's the science is there. On the other hand, you know, we have a movement about body positivity, because obesity is not the same thing as unhealthy, or the appearance of obesity is not the same thing as unhealthy. And some people exercise, they move, they get that heart going, they do all those things, and they remain large people. And that's just them. And so there's this body positivity movement that let's just quit judging everybody according to their body type. And let's avoid the other extreme as well, right? That has led a lot of people to anorexia and dysmorphia and things like that. In between that is discernment. You know, what is healthy for the body? What enables our body to be comfortable space? On the other hand, you know, I'm convinced that too many of us look in the mirror and the first thing we do is tisk our body. Find something about it that we think is wrong and not ideal, or a result of bad eating, bad exercising, not enough this, too much that. Do you feel that tension? I feel like it's kind of it's a thing, and it's not. I named it as cultural tension, but it's two wolves fighting in my own heart sometimes over you know, I want the body to be this, and on the other hand, but I'm the temple of the Holy. I am the temple of the Holy Spirit. Not I get to be that whenever I reach a certain type. I am already. There's something holy and sanctified about my body that I have to look in the mirror and say, this is an act of grace that God chooses to do this. And, you know, if you're not living into it, that's your business, but it's true, right? So that's a real dynamic. Yeah.
Mark, this is America. We want everything to look like in Cadillac. And it doesn't matter if it's your body or think about church. We want to go to some ratty beat up church that needs carpeting, like the church where Maureen and I go in Houston, that was from the 1950s and has never been redone. Or do you want to go to some cool, fancy new church, like what's the one down, the big one down in Lake Forest? It's like a corporate complex. I mean, that's what we want. So, there's just this general love of newness and beauty and people being 20.
Well, yes.
I'm gonna toss out the other aspect, which is we have this culture of thinness. And for so many years, it fell on women, but now it's also much more prevalent in men as well. But, you've got to have the six pack. Whatever it is, you have to have a certain.
I've got the cake.
I guess it does. And I'm gonna come back though, Mark, as to what the words I just heard out of your mouth, which is amazing. I love the aspect of calling it an engine, the beauty of our bodies and what these bodies can do. I mean, have you ever seen a little kid when, a newborn, when, their hand, they can't figure out what it is and they're hitting their head or whatever. And then they realize, oh, I can control this.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
When I was in Chautauqua, the topic that week was AI. And we had a number of AI experts that came in and talked. And they showed all these photos that are generated by AI. And they said, the telltale sign is always the hand. AI cannot figure out how to create a hand because it is one of the most intricately designed mechanisms you'll ever find anywhere. And even if they can get it in a still shot, they can't get it in a moving shot. It's always stilted, just like the old AI stuff when they showed people walking. It just always looked like, you know, they needed to see a doctor. So yeah, the amazing body is a great thing. Now, Bill is inviting us to think also about the amazing mind and feeding our mind, considering what it means to care for our minds as part of our body. I'm preaching to the choir because you're here. You're here in a study group, right? But remember, I asked 2 questions. One is how do we identify, care about our bodies? But the other is how do we identify with our body? This was something that I never really thought about until reading a diary of a woman who was struggling with cancer. And she realized that she treated her body as an enemy, and she would other her body. She had a split person between her and this cancerous body with which she was dealing. Her and her cancer, her and in her case, her breath, her and this part of her. And I think, and the thing she was really struggling with was how she lost her sense of being a whole person. Mind, body, spirit, all is part of her identity. And she had alienated herself, or had been alienated from one part of herself.
I don't want to be anti, but when I was reading this, I was thinking of the hundreds of thousands, men and women, who work 2 jobs, raising a family, all of this stuff in their life, that for many years, they don't have time to think about their bodies. There's no time to do that, you know, and not because they maybe don't want to. I mean, I agree that our bodies are really important, and you know, I've learned that over the years. But realistically, there's probably, you have to be in a certain category when to do that. In other
Right.
words, does that make sense? In
Yeah.
other words, yeah, I worked all my life, then I got sick, and I haven't worked the last few years, and I feel guilty because I'm not working, literally. I mean, my daughter, we talk about it because I feel like I'm gonna be 85, but I feel I should be doing something. And because I worked 2 jobs for 40 years, raised children alone. But so you have that. But like when I was reading, I was thinking, are you really realizing that there's a lot of people that are not really able to think about the care of their bodies? Although I agree that you should.
Yeah, I mean, it's this chapter means one thing to us who have leisure and probably either 1 job people or retired people. It means another thing to a previous generation where I assumed this was true of all the families in my church. My dad always worked 2 jobs. He worked at NASA during the day. He worked at the grocery store at night. I assume that's just what people do. And it means something different to farm workers, right? Who are, they're just laboring, unhealthy hours, OSHA violating hours in order to survive, and in order to help the next generation not have to do that. So yes, the chapter is probably written from a certain perspective of privilege, to those of us who have a certain perspective of privilege and may not have always had that over time. So let's have Jerry, and then I want to go and look at the 2 Thessalonians.
I was just gonna say, based on your comment, that one of the things I enjoyed about the chapter was that rest is a justice issue, right? That there, people of privilege have leisure as a component of their privilege and their status, et cetera, and their wealth. And yet we don't think about people on the white coast that are taking our orders, et cetera, and that it is a matter for us as Christians that is justice that everyone receive restoration.
Right, right. So the easiest part, the low hanging fruit part is to structure our days differently, even though we find that hard. The high fruit, the better part would be to try to just figure out a way to reorder society to where there's not the leisure class and the working class so far apart in there. So forth. That's amazing. Eric makes reference to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. I thought this was really interesting. I'm not someone who reads 2 Thessalonians often. So it was interesting to circle back and to pay attention to that. He's thinking about verses 6 through 13 from chapter 3. So let's just read that for a second and then notice a couple of biblical things that he points out about it. In this Bible, the subtitle there is warning against idleness. Idleness, okay? So as you're reading this, that's what you're looking for. Now we command you, beloved, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, to keep away from believers who are living in idleness and not according to the tradition that they received from us. For you yourself know you ought to imitate us. We were not idle when we were with you, and we did not eat anyone's bread without paying for it, but with toil and labor we worked night and day, so that we might not burden any. Anybody feeling guilty about all your leisure time yet? This was not because we do not have it right, but in order to give you an example to imitate. For even when we were with you, we gave you this command. Anyone who is unwilling to work should not eat. That was the principle at Jamestown. If you want to eat, you have to work, right? For we hear that some of you are living in idleness, mere busybody, not doing any work. Now, such persons we command and exhort in the Lord Jesus Christ to do their work and to earn their own living. Brothers and sisters, do not be weary in doing what is right. Okay, so, I mean, if you ever want a guilt trip for taking a vacation, there you go. But it's an interesting, and you know what? So be it. But the word idleness. I was looking at some comparative translation of that Greek term there, and Young's literal translation uses the word disorderly. Yeah, it's and when you look at the Greek term, that makes sense. It starts with the letter A, alpha, which means not, and so that's the prefix to tactos, which means orderly, to put things as they should be. So we think idleness as just doing nothing, but at least this term is more like doing wrong thing or not doing things in a way that gets anywhere, spinning the wheel, as it were, something like that. And then Eric points out, which I thought this was really interesting, that in verse 11, whoever's writing this, I don't think Paul wrote this letter, but whoever's writing this letter says, we hear some of you are living in idleness, disorderliness, mere busybody. Now, we typically don't think of idleness and busybodiness as the same thing, right? We think of idleness as doing nothing, busybodiness as doing more than you should be doing and doing it in all the wrong places. So if you think of idleness as disorderliness, busybodiness makes a little more sense. But that term, this is the only time it's ever used in the New Testament. And its longer definition is like to bustle around uselessly.
Slump.
Yes.
Yeah. It's, so it made me think of the story of Mary and Martha. That's almost always the story from Luke chapter 11. It's almost always the story people use to talk about Sabbath, because Mary chose the good part, and Martha, just serving people. Giving Jesus and his entourage something to eat. Who needs that when you could just sit at Jesus' feet? And we hear that story represented a lot of times as the problem is Mary has chosen to be a meditative, contemplative person, which is the great thing, and Martha just working. But the word there for Martha, when Jesus says, Martha, 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 is the root is spasm. Spasm, from which we get spastic, right? And it's paraspasm. She says spasmodically moving. The problem with Martha is not that she's working. The problem is the panic, the franticness of it, that Jesus is calling her to be more single-minded. And it's a complicated parable in many ways, but it's kind of an interesting thing that when you see references to idleness or you see reference to busybodiness, it seems to me that in the New Testament, that the issue is not so much whether one is getting a lot done, working hard, or not working hard. The question is focus, and whether one is centered in the work that they do, as opposed to just scattered and as a result not really able to serve well, not really able to find joy in service, those kinds of things. I might be oversimplifying this and maybe bringing together things that don't necessarily belong together, but it does seem to me that it's not that hard work is the only thing or rest is the only thing. It's more like a constant discernment of how to be in the moment where you are at work or at rest. Yes.
Several people have talked about volunteer work and avocation. I talked about sports. And I think we've all seen the thing, and if you're working really hard in a volunteer organization, you will see people that sort of don't take it very seriously, like it's not really a thing.
Right.
And of course, you start to learn to accept if you're a more serious volunteer, that there's just a lot of people who aren't going to do the homework, they're not going to show up on time.
Right.
Certain systems will not be organized to, Fortune 100 corporate standards and the like. And I think that's sort of what's going on here. There's this kind of, there's some people that do whatever sport it is, tennis, whatever, and they're really serious about it. They're taking lessons and they're, playing with leagues and doing this. And then there are other people who are having martinis while they do it. Not really doing it.
I saw that in a couple. The guy was so serious about his golf and taking lessons, and she was in a golf team that started with fuzzy navels. And she's like, yeah, we'd golf eventually. And he was like, well, what'd you score? Yes, Carly.
I've been thinking that it's not just idleness, but what it does to our mind and our soul. So if we're taking the time for Sabbath and reflection, and we live in a culture where our bodies are much more important than our minds and our souls, or it's the culture reflects that, not us. So if we take the time and consciously work on improving our minds and our souls, then it's not idleness.
That's great. And honestly, that's one reason why I appreciate you all being here week after week is I know it's not because I have profound things to say. I think because we all thirst for kind of grasping what this reign of God that we've been blessed with is all about and how we can participate in it in the best way. So that's important. Yes.
I think I was struck that from the inception, from the seventh day of rest, that what we are told to do and invited into by a gracious, loving God is luxuriate in my shalom. Luxuriate in my shalom and just stay there. But the difficult thing, and particularly in this culture, among all the Western cultures, is that the proximity to, I'm not doing it good enough. Yeah, I'm content with my body and I thank God for my body, but I'm not, or I'm meditating, I'm not meditating very.
Yeah.
It's all so close to the temptation to self-judge.
Yeah.
And I think what the affirmation is saying and what God has ordained from the creation story is just be, whether it's a moment or a day, luxuriate in the peace of God.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Luxuriate in the shalom, the peace of God.
So maybe the ladies with the fuzzy navels are doing a better job. The guy who's hysterical because he used to be a 5 and now he's a 6.
Yeah, it's possible. The golf metaphors start to lose me after a while, but yeah, so speaking of the creation story, we do have in that first creation story, the pinnacle of creation is Sabbath. God rested. That's what it seems to be leading to. And when the 10 Commandments are given in Exodus 20, the whole idea of observing Sabbath is because God did it. That's amazing, I think. God didn't need it in order for God's body to kind of properly restore, but God did it. And as God does that, we're invited to do it. And then when the law is given again in Deuteronomy 5, the rationale changed a little bit. Remember, you are slaves, and now you have been freed to observe the Sabbath. So the idea is we're not just imitating God's pattern, but it's also a resistance against being enslaved to productivity. That's why I thought the Exodus 5 part conversation with Pharaoh's pushback was they were being lazy. Was really a nice connected tissue between the creation story and those two iterations of the 10 Commandments. It does raise one question. I would love to hear from as many of you as we can. There are a number of folks who, during COVID, none of us could come here, and it broke our patterns. And the way we did worship changed dramatically. We tried using the iPhone in the sanctuary and streaming worship that way and realized that the room was too echoey and it didn't work. We went into the fellowship hall where you got carpet and it deadens the sound and still didn't quite work. We figured out that we could do it if we ran all the singers, speakers, piano, and everything into a single speaker and put it right under the iPhone and then streamed it that way. And that worked for the end user's experience, I think. They could hear, and what they heard and saw kind of were closely related. But it was funny. I mean, there were several months. We took the corner of the fellowship hall and put plants and made it kind of sanctuary-ish, and had this set up. And then we had the piano over here. Then we had a big plastic shield between the piano and the bass. And then a big plastic shield between these two singers and those two singers. You know, we didn't know what else to do, right? So it just broke everything. And then when we were able to join back together again, there were two tendencies. One was, let's just get back to what it was. And the other was, wait a minute, we learned a few things, and some of the modifications kind of are cool, or not cool, but seem to work well. We were still not sure what spread COVID, so we were not anxious to just jump back. We had pool noodles on our pews to keep people 6 feet apart. I was always amazed at how deliberately we set those out and how quickly people would slide them down when they went to the down. There are a number of folks. I'm scared to explore how many. For whom breaking the habit of being here every week freed them of that habit and have chosen not to re-engage that way. Now, not to say they're not engaged at all. They may be one of those 180 to 100 people every week who either tunes into the Saturday or Sunday service on YouTube. They may simply read the Faith in Action or the Monday newsletter that we send out with all the prayer requests, so they can kind of be up on how everybody's doing. They care. When I reach out to them, they typically know what's going on and do not feel disconnected from the community. But I can't tell you how many of them have not been in worship since we resumed in-person worship. And you know, it's hard for me to explore with them what that's about, because you know, I'm the principal. They've been called to the office. They're in trouble whenever I call. Hey, where the heck have you been? Right? So there's that. But it does make me wonder, is the notion that we should die with our boots on, and that church is the place where we put your boots on and tell you what to do. We create volunteer opportunities. We equip you with conviction and guilt so you can go out and work harder. You know, we say, this is your Sabbath. We say, we quote, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together. And while you're here, you should be doing this, that, or the other thing, because you don't want to be a consumer, you want to be an active participant. I think all of those are real, true things. But does it make participation in the life of the body of Christ a burdensome obligation, void of rest and restoration? On the other hand, if you focus on rest and restoration, I mean, what are you entertaining the truth? What are we doing, right? It really raises the question of who ought we to be as the church in order to honor this notion of Sabbath beautifully and meaningfully. Anybody want to opine on that, or at least respond to that dilemma?
Well, I think the question seems to me more generally to be about the value of formal worship. And the way this came to me is I'm engaged in this ministry Stephen ministry, where you sort of help out people in the congregation or in various kinds of distress. It's supposed to be Christian. So of course, I'm like, well, what about all these people that have memorized all these Bible verses? So they have exactly the right Bible verse for any given interpersonal situation. So of course, having someone in the household who's in game, I asked Mr. Laureen and I said, hey, what if it says I don't memorize all these Bible verses so I can say the right thing when I'm visiting sick people? And I looked at it, I said, you know, you need to engage formal worship in these practices in ways that are right and practical for you and have the discernment to do that. I think that for me is the great challenge. It's like, just because some other person does something, doesn't mean that I should be doing it like them. I should be figuring out what the way to do it is for me that brings me closer to God and makes me more effective. So,
Right. Great. Shirley, make it quick because there are a couple more
I
comments.
just was on the committee when it was time to re-select people for various committees.
Yeah.
And was given names, et cetera. And several of them came sporadically and all, but I knew they were good people. But one of the things I said to several of them was, I said, when you agree to be on a committee, I said, you become more attached to the church because you're with people that you may not have known and you have a connection. And I remember a couple of them said to me, that's right. I've been meaning to get back on Sundays and I haven't, and I want to do this. And so I just remember that particular thing.
Right.
If you don't have that connection, you're not doing something, it probably makes it easier on Sunday morning to, not get up dressed in your clothes and go to church.
When I pastored a new church, the smaller the church was, the higher level of attendance among its members we had. I mean, we were running 80%
Yeah.
of the numbers on Sunday over and against the number of members. And the larger you got, the more expendable people felt, like they wouldn't be missed perhaps. I don't know what the phenomenon was, but it's a real one. Yes.
Well, as a practical matter, prior to COVID, there was no Zoom here.
Right.
What happens if you slowly stop doing Zoom on Sunday, Saturday?
Yeah, there you have a cart and a horse sort of thing, because we had some folks who, for whom getting here is a problem.
So
And this is a lifeline. Yeah,
It's not a neighborhood church.
yeah, and we picked up, I mean, I know folks in Virginia who watch our services weekly, right? So yeah, that's an ongoing question. Are you creating culture dependent on the medium whenever you use the medium? And I don't know of an answer to that. Yeah. Daryl had something I want to maybe end with this, but she asked, so in that first creation story, why does God rest if God's not tired? Why does God rest? And perhaps as a matter of setting a pattern, setting an example. I mean, I'm not at all able or interested in reading God's mind. Why is that the way the story is told? I think it's probably a little more tangible of a question for us. And I think that first creation story, in many ways, is a resistance story, probably verbalized and then finally written around the time of the end of the exile into Babylon. When the people of Israel were in Babylon, they were exposed to a creation myth that's all about violence. The earth was created when one God ripped another God in half, making part of that the dome, part of that God the earth beneath. And the earth created in a violent act is inherently a violent place. And that's why, to please the God and to be like the God, you are a violent people, a military people. And to prove that the gods are on your side, you win battles. You win battles. That's the whole Babylonian theology in many respects. And if you hear the first creation story as a resistance story, then the world is not created in violence. The world's created and called good. And the world is created as a place of abundance, not a struggle for survival. And when you have a God who rests, then the world is not dictated by productivity. And I think that if anything, that's my best take on it, Beryl, would be that in some respects, it's a pushback against a cultural demand for productivity all the time. That no, that is not what's written into the structure of the world itself, because the Creator rests. And now we have that command to do the same. So it's probably the reality of the quality of the people of Israel revering rest that shaped the way the original story is told. Now, you got to buy into a whole bunch of ways of thinking about the Bible for that to work. But that's my best. Okay, we are way past time. Thank you, everybody. Next week, same time, same place, only will be arranged a little differently. And we will finish up our work on the Phoenix application.